Hi, I'm Kim Nolte, and last night I was hoping to be able to tell this story at the Moth, but my name didn't get drawn, and so I want to perform this story today for you on this video so that I capture it while it's still fresh in my mind. I've been preparing, and I'll give it another try at the Moth sometime in the future. The theme of the night last night was perfect for my story, Fumbles and Fouls. So here we go. When I was 20 years old, I drove a 40-foot tour bus off of a train, which is not the kind of mistake that stays a secret very long. Okay, in the summer of my 19th year, I was working at home up in Alaska during college summer, and I was working retail, not a great paying job. And I got a call from my friend Glenn from college, and he said, Kim, I'm up here for the summer working, and I was wondering if you want to get together. I don't have any wheels, so you'll have to drive. So I went over to Glenn's apartment to pick him up, and I saw something kind of unusual on the table. I saw a big stack of cash just stacked against the wall, like 9 inches of cash. I said to him, Glenn, I thought you said you were driving a bus this summer. What are you really doing? And he said, I am driving a bus, Kim. It's a tour bus. And when you give a tour and people like it, they give you tips. So those are my tips. I just haven't had a chance to take them to the bank yet. So, oh boy, I was intrigued and it made me want to have that job. So the following spring, I applied for it and I was trained to drive a bus. And in 3 months, I got my commercial driver's license and I returned to Anchorage. And in June of the year I was 20, I began driving the 40-foot bus with passengers, giving tours. I loved it. I had a microphone in front of me, passengers asking me all sorts of questions and being so impressed with me for being able to drive such a large motor coach. I was feeling pretty confident. Then, about a month into my time working, I was assigned to drive to Whittier. Now, in 1981, the only way to get a vehicle over to Whittier, Alaska, was to put it on the back of a train, and then the train would transport you through a 2.5 mile railroad tunnel to the other side. Then you would drive it off the train, etc. So, but I say put it on the back of a train, that means parallel parking a 40-foot bus on a flatbed car and then driving through a network of cage cars. Picture rebar on three sides, a grid that's just barely bigger than your bus. I mean, it was like threading a 40-foot motor coach through the eye of a needle. So the next day, I've got my passengers, 22 of them on board, and I'm waiting for my turn. And this other driver says, Kim, are you nervous? It's your first time, huh? And I said, well, I wasn't, but well, anyway, time to go. I get behind the wheel of the bus. I ease it up that loading ramp, parallel park like a dream on that flatbed car, and then I start rolling through these cage cars. And like I say, very little clearance, and after about three railroad cars, I clipped my right mirror. It folded in a little bit. I wasn't feeling quite so confident. So I started going slow. I'd give it gas to get between the cars, and then I'd feather those brakes, trying to avoid going too fast. I was nearing the front car. I mean, I'd been through like a dozen cars, and there's a railroad employee up there waving at me, the first bus in the row, to come on, just get out here and park your bus. I was going so slow. So, anyway, I started to give it some more gas to go forward, and the bus wouldn't move. I could hear the RPMs coming up, and it wouldn't move. So I wiggled the wheel, thinking maybe the tires jammed, and gave it some more gas. And it's really whirring now. And suddenly it moved, and we lurched forward, and the bus went over the edge of the train, and the right front wheel went off. So now we're sitting with three wheels on the train and one on the axle with the wheel hanging over the side. So the man in the bus behind me, Wayne, says, Kim, please pull forward and turn off your bus. You're gassing us out back here with fumes. So, oh man, I told him I can't. I've driven off the train. We're sitting on the axle. So I turned off the bus anyway, and I felt just physically sick. And I didn't feel so confident now. I was pretty sure I had just finished my last day of driving a tour bus. A few moments later, I was very surprised to see Wayne outside my driver window because it was really narrow, but he slithered out of his bus and along the side of mine somehow, and there he was. And he says, Kim, put your hand out the window. And so I stick my hand out this little tiny driver's window, and he takes my hand in both of his, and he looks me deep in the eye, and he says, Kim, remember, there are no problems, only solutions. Pretty profound for a 23-year-old bus driver, huh? Well, that calmed me down a little bit, and we then waited for the solution to happen. And here's what it was: we were pinned behind the rebar and couldn't get out. And anyway, they backed up the whole train, now loaded with other vehicles, behind me, and they pulled up a tow truck in front of me. It hooked on, and it started lifting. Horrific sound of metal on metal as it's lifting, and then the cable on the tow truck snapped, and we went back down onto the axle. So they sent a man with a blowtorch, and he torched away the rebar around our door and around the tires so that there'd be less friction. And then they took further action, and eventually we were back on that train and riding through this dark train tunnel to Whittier. I was reading my passenger's Robert Service poetry, trying to redeem myself as a driver. We got to the other side. I drove my patient, kind passengers down to the port and said goodbye. And then I got a new load of passengers that had been waiting for 3 hours for us. And we're waiting in line by the train to get back on. And this guy in the front seat says to me, So, we heard that there was a blonde woman on the other side of the mountain who drove the bus off the train. I said, Wow, that's terrible. I hope she's all right. Back at 9 p.m., back in Anchorage, after dropping off all my passengers, I get to my last stop, and the two top company officials are standing on the sidewalk waiting for me, which never a good sign. What happened? They asked. And I explained everything. And when I got to the part about the bus wouldn't move, they said, Do you remember in training when we taught you that buses run on an air braking system? And if the pressure gets too low, then an emergency override brake comes on and stops the bus. And that's what must have happened to you. And then when you gave it that gas, you built up the air pressure. And then eventually the override went off. And that's why you lurched forward and you were wiggling the wheel. So off you went. So anyway, at least now I understood my mistake. And then they asked me, What does a rider do when they fall off a horse? And I said, Well, in my case, they probably go home and reconsider their career choice, right? And they said, Nope. They get back on and they ride. And you are going to do Whittier tomorrow and again the next day. And I did repeatedly. Eventually, they trusted me so much on Whittier that I became the trainer for new drivers doing that maneuver. And the following year, I taught all the new drivers. So I learned a good lesson that day. We all make mistakes. Mine involved a 40-foot motor coach, a pretty narrow train car, and a very long, stressful day. And I still think about what Wayne said to me that day. There are no problems, only solutions, which is a very comforting philosophy, unless you're the person that just drove a off of a train. Thank you.